insights, impact, and inspiration right here on Channel Africa. Available on the Channel Africa app.
And we are live on the DSTV audio bouquet 802. Download the SABC Plus app. You're able to stream live, including on the YouTube channel. A very good evening to you. This is Africa World Hour. I am Tsipiso Makwetla. Thank you so much for joining us as we wrap up the day's events from the heart of the continent to all corners of the globe. Let's start with your top stories this hour.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
4 municipalities in South Africa's Mpumalanga province have registered large numbers of malaria cases. Over 619 people have been infected and at least 5 people have died between April and November this year. The Department of Health has visited some of the municipalities to raise awareness as the region marks SADC Malaria Day. Director for Communications or Communicable Diseases, Mandla Zwane.
We are approaching festive season. We know very well that the community will be traveling to different areas, even areas that have known to have malaria. So we are also requesting that when they go there, they can get prophylaxis treatment for malaria in our local health facilities. That tablet is given to them 2 days before. They should take those treatment 2 days before they go to that area. And they also need to make sure that they drink those treatment when they are there in that particular area. And even when they come back to our areas after the visit, they need to make sure that they finish all the package that they give it.
And still in South Africa, its President Cyril Ramaphosa has reaffirmed the deep historical and cultural ties between South Africa and Mozambique, describing the peoples of the two nations as one people bound by heritage, geography and family. Speaking during his working visit to Maputo for the 4th South Africa-Mozambique Binational Commission, Ramaphosa highlighted the shared languages and close relations between the neighbours. The visit, ending today, has further cemented the strong bilateral cooperation between the two countries.
South Africans and Mozambicans are bound together by a common heritage, by geographic proximity and familial ties that go back generations. We are one people. Some of the languages that are spoken in Mozambique are also spoken in South Africa. It's always a joy when I meet President Chissano and we speak together in Shangaan, which we both know very well and enjoy ourselves. And sometimes when we want to gossip about certain people, we resort to Shangaan and they can't hear us.
The European Council and European Parliament have reached a provisional agreement to phase out imports of Russian gas by 2027. Russia has been funding its campaign in Ukraine through its export of fossil fuels. The European countries still a significant market, despite having sharply reduced their reliance on Russian energy. The BBC's Sebastian Usher has those details.
The European Council says the agreement is intended to end dependency on Russian energy, which the EU has been reducing since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Before the invasion, Russia accounted for 45% of gas imports to the EU. That's now down to around 12%. Among European countries still receiving Russian gas are France, Belgium and Hungary. The EU Energy Commissioner, Dan Jurgensen, has welcomed the move, saying, "We stand strong with Ukraine."
French President Emmanuel Macron has arrived in Beijing for an official visit that will also take him to the city of Chengdu. He is expected to urge his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to do more to end Russia's war in Ukraine. Chinese economic support is vital to Russia's war effort. The BBC's Stephen McDonald has more.
We are approaching festive season. We know very well that the community will be traveling to different areas, even areas that have known to have malaria. So we are also requesting that when they go there, they can get prophylaxis treatment for malaria in our local health facilities. That tablet is given to them 2 days before. They should take those treatment 2 days before they go to that area. And they also need to make sure that they drink those treatment when they are there in that particular area. And even when they come back to our areas after the visit, they need to make sure that they finish all the package that they give it.
And I sincerely apologize for that incorrect soundbite. Let's move on to Russia's President Vladimir Putin, open to parts of the US peace proposal for Ukraine, he says, and is ready to meet American negotiators as often as is needed to end the war. Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine almost 4 years ago. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says it will be wrong to suggest Moscow is rejecting all US ideas. The comments follow a 5-hour meeting between President Putin and US envoys, which produced no tangible breakthrough. The BBC's Joel Gunter reports.
There are still red lines on both sides. I've been speaking to members of the Ukrainian parliament this morning. The feeling here is that any plan that involves Ukraine having to cede territory that Russia hasn't already captured on the battlefield would be a red line. The other key red line here for the Ukrainians is security guarantees from their European and US partners. So waking up this morning here in Kyiv, still a feeling of quite a long way to go and still clear red lines on both sides.
Africa, voici Abedi.
Oui, c'est moi.
Abedi est un passionné de musique dans l'âme. Il a un goût pour toutes sortes de musique et passe ses journées à écouter Channel Africa.
J'aime beaucoup la musique africaine.
OK. Devinez quoi? Channel Africa veut aider Abedi et les mélomanes du monde entier à découvrir encore plus de musique incroyable. C'est pourquoi Channel Africa appelle les artistes africains à soumettre leur musique. Chers artistes, n'oubliez pas de nous fournir toutes vos informations pertinentes à l'email adresse musique@channelafrica.co.za. Les soumissions sont votre chance d'être entendues, mais elles ne garantissent pas une playlist. Toutes les soumissions seront soigneusement examinées pour voir si elles répondent aux exigences de notre station. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
French arms company Thales and former President Jacob Zuma will apply for leave to appeal the Pietermaritzburg High Court's dismissal of their application to be acquitted of all charges in the arms deal corruption case in South Africa. 20 years after Zuma was first charged in 2005, evidence is yet to be led in the case. In 2020 and 2022, two senior Thales employees who figure prominently in the charges passed away, prompting the application that Thales and Zuma's right to a fair trial had been infringed. The state has filed an application for a court order that the trial must proceed despite any further applications and appeals. Dries Liebenberg has more.
Thales has argued that the evidence of Pierre Moynot and Alain Tetard, its directors in South Africa in the 90s and early 2000s, is crucial to answer the charges that former President Jacob Zuma was offered a 500,000 rand a year bribe. This was allegedly to ensure that he protects Thales in the investigation into irregularities around the 1999 arms deal. However, Judge Nkosinathi Cili ruled in June that the court doesn't have the power to stop a prosecution. That power lies with the National Prosecuting Authority. Judge Cili pointed out that society's interest in such a high-profile case should also be taken into account. He further said it's speculative at this stage to say that other witnesses, like for example Zuma's former financial advisor Schabir Shaik, cannot assist the defense in their case. Meanwhile, the state has lodged an application for Judge Cili to order that the trial proceeds, despite any further appeals or applications by the defense. Lead prosecutor, Advocate Billy Downer, says in court papers that the prosecution of the case has been delayed for more than 18 years by legal challenges. Advocate Downer says during that period, Zuma made 2 presentations to the National Director of Public Prosecutions, entered a special plea, and lodged 7 pre-trial proceedings, all of which were unsuccessful. Advocate Downer says in papers Zuma's arguments have been dismissed in the initial applications, but he then pursued it on appeal as far as he possibly could. Once these appeals are exhausted, another point is raised and the exercise is repeated, according to Advocate Downer. Judge Cili has set aside 2 days for arguments. I am Dries Liebenberg in Durban.
And now at 10 minutes past 9, let's move on to this next story. US President Donald Trump will host leaders of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, and the DRC President Felix Tshisekedi in Washington on Thursday to sign what has been called an historic peace and economic agreement. Now, meanwhile, ahead of the meeting, clashes between the M23 rebel group and the Congolese government forces were reported. They supported by coalition troops. The fighting broke out across South Kivu province, escalating tensions between the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, to talk about these developments, we're joined by Buikanyo Nkwatle, an independent social and political analyst. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening, Sepiso, and evening to your viewers at home. It's a pleasure to be with you.
If you could just share with us how long you have been watching this conflict and what have been your views leading up to this, just in brief, so that we get a sense of the context from which you view this.
To be quite frank with you, I think the DRC conflict has been on both print and social media for the mere fact that the conflict has been going on for decades, which now it has to some extent brought attention not only domestically but internationally, as we have seen now that the US is trying to facilitate the peace talks between the DRC and the Rwandan government. But you would remember, Tsepiso, that this is not the first time that such a meeting has taken place. Perhaps this will be the second meeting, the first meeting which has taken place earlier, which was part of this U.S. efforts to facilitate the peace between DRC and Rwanda, to find lasting peace in the DRC. But for the mere fact that this has been an ongoing conflict for many years, if decades, but the genesis of it, you could remember, goes back to the Rwandan genocide that took place, and then was the genesis of what we are finding ourselves in today.
And this is the point, really, just to understand the prism from which you look at this, because there are those who are questioning the ability of the United States to foster lasting peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo, saying that it's such a deeply entrenched and complex conflict because of the various role players and the continuing splintering of rebel groups and changing of allegiances. So we're seeing fresh fighting breaking out in South Kivu, in Katogota, Luvungi, Kaziba, Haut Plateau, and Kasika Mwenga. So the setting for these talks, is it a solid one?
I don't think it is a solid one, because if you are not going to bring all stakeholders on board, it defeats the whole purpose of the whole facilitation talk. Because one of the bone of contention, I think, raised within the M23 is the fact that they've been excluded, they've been isolated from all these talks, and the DRC government itself has not honored some of the agreements that they had in terms of integrating some of their members into formal structures of the military, and also recognizing some of the Rwandan citizens, refugees who had fled during the genocide into the DRC. They have not been recognized officially. So if you have not all the role players who are part and parcel of this whole conflict, and you only take a segment of them, I don't think it will have an impact. But we have to remember what is the interest of the United States in all of this. And the US has been very vocal to say that they are facilitating this peace talk because of, remember that the DRC is it's very rich in terms of the mineral, the welfare mineral. And we have heard in the past that the Republican senators said it quite clearly that their interest in the DRC conflict is because of the minerals that are there. You know that those minerals are very critical for such important components like your electronics, like your military gadgets and stuff. So that's the interest of the U.S. You would remember, if I can take you back, even if the U.S. were facilitating the peace talk between Russia and Ukraine, and even himself, the Republican governor, he said that the Ukraine will have to repay the U.S. through mineral wealth for their support in terms of giving them military equipment to enable them to fight the Russian war. So at the core of it is the issue of the minerals. So I don't think that the impact will have, as long as key and critical role players are not included in this peace talks.
And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about regional bodies, particularly African Union and the various regional economic blocks on the continent. Why are they not stepping up to the plate? Because if we're going to ask about the sincerity of the US's role, given the fact that critical minerals are themselves at the very core of the continuing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, what type of outcome are we likely to have? One that either deeply entrenches the conflict, but also there's a somewhat sinister understanding if you're saying you're negotiating only at states level, but it's almost as if there is an acceptance, a quiescence in that perhaps M23 is represented there by President Paul Kagame.
I think we have to, at some point, also recognize the concerted efforts done by our regional bodies, especially SADC, even if they were not well coordinated in terms of sufficient resources. But the efforts have been there. But also, it then begs the question, how does this paint these regional bodies if we've got international actors coming to facilitate peace talks where we think that AU or SADC has failed? But perhaps it's also a question of the political will. Does this regional organ have the political will also, and the masses also too? Because remember now, the world is moving from peace through negotiation and mediation, but peace through strength and transition. That's why we see the world powers, the economic powers and the military minds coming also to say, how can we assist, how can we facilitate, but bearing in mind what is their interest. Because when Trump came into the presidency, he came into the presidency with the slogan that America must be first, the interest of Americans must be put first. So this is part and parcel of trying to reclaim the economic power of America in the geopolitics of, because we know with this terrorist thing that is going on, it's part of the plan to reclaim, to put America first. So I think the AU and other Rex, perhaps it's the lack of political will to move decisively in these issues, to address the issue. How can African the problems find African solutions?
Is it a lack of political will or leadership, or is it really the fact that we have lacked political strategy? Because if we're saying this is performative diplomacy with concerted effort at stabilizing optics that will lead to making America great again, if we've been caught napping and we've just woken up, then what should we be doing with urgency here to not only preserve the integrity of peace work that had been done by other regional bodies that you mentioned, SADC and South Africa has been, IGAD, they have all played a role to the lead up to at least the moving of the chess piece at some level.
Yeah, indeed, you have been coordinating the whole thing, and perhaps, like you have mentioned, perhaps they need to go to the drawing board and say, we have tried this and it has failed. What more strategic avenues can we then employ so we can find lasting peace in the DRC? But I mean, the DRC has been engulfed in this conflict for years. deeply entrenched on it. So I'm not so certain what avenues can then the AU and other RECs come up with, except through facility, because we have to respect also the sovereignty of these countries. We cannot train, even if we want to touch through Peace and Security Council, but also we have to recognize that these are a sovereign state on their own. So the manner of approach also. But I'm really not optimistic too much, especially if the international actors coming into the scene, because they are also coming to pursue their own personal interest at the end of the day.
So just finally then, for this, if we're to be positive about the peace efforts of the United States and a somewhat stable peace agreement that will have embedded within it, security monitoring mechanisms and enforcement to ensure that there is disarmament. What are the timelines, and what should both countries be agreeing to if there is going to be a firm peace at play?
So like I've already alluded to the fact that if we don't have all the role players involved in this peace facilitation, I mean, the United States concerted effort to bring peace will not materialize. It only materializes in paper. Like I've said, this is not the first time we have seen leaders going to America, positive outcomes, them signing peace agreement, peace accord. Let's look at what happened here in Qatar. There was a peace agreement, the peace accord that was signed, but it was in paper, but in reality it did not materialize on the ground because you have left the key important non-state actors out of all this facilitation. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not optimistic that America will find a lasting solution today. As long as people feel excluded, as long as all these militant groups feel that their issues are not addressed, we'll still have continue seeing these attacks. So I don't want to play the devil's advocate in this issue, but I must say, in all honesty, I don't see America being successful in trying to resolve a long-standing conflict that has got decades. So perhaps it will need a miracle for America to do that. But then, we have seen Trump becoming very impatient, especially with Ukraine, with Russia.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not so optimistic about that.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Much appreciated. That is Boikanyo Nkwatla, an independent social and political analyst, speaking to us about peace talks to be held in Washington, led by President Donald Trump, with the warring parties, presidents of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, and Rwanda's President Paul Kagame.
Africa, voici Abedi.
Oui, c'est moi.
Abedi est un passionné de musique dans l'âme. Il a un goût pour toutes sortes de musique et passe ses journées à écouter Channel Africa.
J'aime beaucoup la musique africaine.
Ok. Devinez quoi? Channel Africa veut aider Abedi et les mélomanes du monde entier à découvrir encore plus de musique incroyable. C'est pourquoi Channel Africa appelle les artistes africains à soumettre leur musique. Chers artistes, n'oubliez pas de nous fournir toutes vos informations pertinentes à l'email adresse musique@channelafrica.co.za. Les soumissions sont votre chance d'être entendues, mais elles ne garantissent pas une playlist. Toutes les soumissions seront soigneusement examinées pour voir si elles répondent aux exigences de notre station. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Tshepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
25 minutes past 9, continuing with Spotlight on the U.S. This time you look at Minnesota officials reacting strongly after President Donald Trump launched a harsh attack on Somali immigrants, calling them garbage and accusing them of ripping off the state. The remarks come amid reports of possible federal immigration raids targeting Somali communities in the Twin Cities. Local leaders say they haven't been notified, but they are preparing for the worst. Botlhale Phele has more.
The controversy began in Washington, where President Trump used a cabinet meeting to launch one of his most direct attacks yet on Somali immigrants and on Minnesota officials who support them.
Somalians ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions, every year, billions of dollars, and they contribute nothing. The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay?
Trump went further, calling Somali immigrants garbage and accusing Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and her supporters of harming the country. He also said he wants to pause migration from what he called third world countries, a category he noted excludes white Afrikaners. The comments come as Minnesota officials say they've received credible media reports suggesting that up to 100 federal immigration agents may be deployed to target Somali communities in Minneapolis and St. Paul. But local leaders say they haven't been formally informed and they will not cooperate.
To our Somali community, we love you and we stand with you. That commitment is rock solid. Minneapolis is proud to be home to the largest Somali community in the entire country.
Mayor Jacob Frey says any raid aimed at Somalis risks detaining a community of majorly documented U.S. citizens based purely on appearance.
Targeting Somali people means that due process will be violated, mistakes will be made. And let's be clear, it means that American citizens will be detained for no other reason than the fact that they look like they are Somali. That is not now and will never be a legitimate reason.
Across the river in St. Paul, Mayor Melvin Carter condemned the president's language as racist and dangerous.
When we talk about attacks, racist, Islamophobic, xenophobic attacks on our Somali community, and you combine that with what Mayor Frey just said, the vast majority of our Somali community are citizens. So who he just attacked isn't just Somalis. Who he attacked is Somali Americans. Who he attacked is Americans. And so if the President of the United States is telling you out loud that he hates Americans, then I can't imagine a greater confession of incompetence to do the job that you've been hired to do.
The Twin Cities is home to roughly 80,000 Somali residents. Many have lived in the U.S. for decades, and most are documented or citizens. But after the president's remarks, community leaders say fear is rising.
I am proud to say I'm a Somali American. This country welcomed me and my family 26 years ago. It has provided me a life that I did not have in Somalia. We came here and we are thankful to be here. I've been educated here, got the opportunity to serve my community, to be a council member. I know many families are fearful tonight. They are.
Police say they've received no official confirmation of upcoming raids, urging calm while asking any protests to remain peaceful. As tensions rise, Minnesota leaders say their message is clear. Somali Americans are part of we the people, and they're not going anywhere. I'm Batali Pile, SABC News.
And now at 30 minutes past 9, we continue. This time we look at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. It has announced an immediate pause on all immigration applications from 19 countries already on the U.S. travel ban list, including green card requests and U.S. citizenship applications. The list of countries include Afghanistan and Somalia. The freeze is triggered by a deadly shooting involving an Afghan national near Washington, D.C. So this means thousands of immigrants, some of whom had already undergone extensive vetting, will now face indefinite delays as their applications are placed under review. We cross to Washington, D.C. now to speak to American writer, activist and political commentator Phyllis Bennis. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I'm just wondering, what is the view of general Americans with regards to those of a foreign heritage who are American citizens, but just generally anybody who's not blonde and blue-eyed and regarded as quintessentially American?
It's a very mixed bag, I would say, in this country. There's a view that has a very idealized understanding of the United States as a country of immigrants. We are a nation of immigrants. We have always welcomed immigrants, which of course is not true. There have been waves of anti-immigrant xenophobia in this country that went after Chinese people, that have gone after Africans, that have gone after Haitians, that have gone after Latinos from all different countries. Over and over again, we have seen these waves of Islamophobia and broader xenophobia. The Muslim ban of Trump's first term, which took 4 tries before he could get it approved by the Supreme Court. All of that is part of a broad history. When you ask people, well, what do you think of the non-citizens who work in the care house where your parents live, who care for your elderly parents, who care for your children? They say, well, that's fine. We don't want them to go after them. We want them just to go after the bad guys. And what we've seen is that the Trump administration has managed to persuade far too many people in this country that there is something real about the claim, the false claim, that they are going after criminal immigrants, not ordinary immigrants, not ordinary people who are simply trying to work and provide for their families, which is precisely what they are doing. So the political nature of it, right now, there is this popular version that says because the US is close to becoming what some call a majority-minority country, meaning that we will have a majority of people who are not white, which many of us cheer for. It will make this country far more diverse even than it is now, and it's already pretty diverse. But it will make the possibility of equality much stronger when there are a broader set of numbers where we don't have an overwhelming majority of white people and only a very small number of people of color. That's no longer true. The movement known as MAGA, Make America Great Again, is often described as actually standing for making America white again. That's the goal here. This is bound up with racism. The anti-immigrant assessments that come from people in the administration, like the Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, Stephen Miller, who is an ideologically driven xenophobe, has no interest in allowing to remain not only people without documents, not only new refugees or new immigrants, but people with green cards, people who are allowed.
And that's what I want to get to, really, the fact that it has been inferred that there is a white supremacy, a tint or ideological center to Make America Great Again. And this new movement by US President Donald Trump seems to be moving away from individual vetting, especially if the guise is national security. So now it's going to country exclusion. And it's interesting to hear you say that those who are anti-foreign nationals seem to think that there's a them and a they who can stay because of the servitude that they provide to US citizens, but not those that they can see as a competition. So what is going to happen then to people who've been there for years, who already are on the path to naturalization, who are already through the process of getting a green card?
It's a very dangerous moment for all migrants, for all immigrants in this country. As we know, it's not only undocumented people who may be here without the proper documents. They are not the only ones who are at risk. It includes people with green cards. It includes naturalized citizens who are now being threatened with being denaturalized and deported, perhaps to a country that they left when they were 6 months old as a baby. So it's a very dangerous moment. And what we're seeing is this major appeal of the Trump administration, part of the electoral process that we saw in the campaigning, aimed at targeting parts of the white working class to believe that somehow the lack of jobs, inflation, the lack of health care, the lack of educational opportunities in this country is all because of immigrants, not because of the vast inequality in our country, where so much of the vast wealth of this country is concentrated at the very, very top, not just the 1%, but the 1/10 of 1%. That is the real cause. That and the money that goes to the military. You know, it's way more than half of the US budget goes to the military and to militarization of our police, interventions around the world. So that's why there are economic problems. But people now are starting to believe this false rhetoric that it's because of immigrants. It's because they're taking your jobs. It's because people are getting health care who are not citizens and don't deserve it. It's all of these things come together so that when we hear these rants, these racist rants from the president, the way he talked about Somalia, saying that I don't want them in our country. It may not be politically correct, but I don't care. He said we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country.
And that's the point I want to get to, because this seems targeted at non-European immigration. And if you look at the list of countries, and the question then becomes, how sustainable will this be in terms of policy framework to enact this? Because if the sentiment is, as you say, the battle for scarce resources, which is something that South Africans, there's a huge discussion about that. And the posture does manifest in xenophobic, Afrophobic, particularly Afrophobic behavior. So for Americans, how sustainable do they think that this will be? Americans, as you say, was built on the backs of immigrants.
Yeah, it's a very difficult reality that people are dealing with. The question of who are the good immigrants versus who are those who it's okay to pick up off the streets by masked men, put in an unlicensed car and taken off to prison somewhere. Families can't find out who they are. That's fine for some immigrants, but not the immigrants who live next door to me, the lovely immigrant family who are my neighbors, not my child's teacher, not the woman who runs the daycare center, not the lovely nurse at the hospital that we go to. You know, they're exceptions. So it's the knowing personal ties with immigrant communities that changes that vantage point. But right now, it is escalating massively. And the notion that it is people of the global south, particularly sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, North Africa regions are the most being targeted right now. But we've heard language from President Trump several years ago, where he talked about, why can't we get more refugees from Norway? That was the example he gave. Instead of, I don't think I can say the word on television, but using a slur, a very horrific word to describe other countries, African countries in particular. And it's ground into people's ideas of who are the good countries, where someone coming from Norway would be great, but somebody coming from Somalia, we don't really want them in this country. So that's the language that people are hearing. That's what children are hearing. It's a very dangerous moment when we have this kind of xenophobic language that is so bound up with white supremacy and racism, and that is gaining traction at the highest levels of government.
Very briefly, do you think that this is something that will then be inculcated into future broader foreign policy directives, irrespective of the Trump administration? Because what I'm really asking is, are we going to see a lot more countries on a travel ban list on the whim of one individual?
Well, we are seeing it not only in terms of visas for refugees or for people coming. We're seeing it in the announcement of the denial of visas to the South African team who should be coming right now to the G20 prep meetings, let alone to the summit at the end of the year. And yet saying that the only refugees in the whole world who have the right to come to the United States are white Afrikaners. So we are seeing that. I think that there is a challenge to the extraordinary, powerful immigrant rights movement in this country. It's always social movements that challenge these things. And the immigrant rights movement is doing an incredible job linking with issues of racism, with issues of Palestinian rights, because that's one of the targeted groups, non-citizens who might have the audacity to stand up for Palestinian rights in the context of a genocide. So all of these things are underway right now. But I think there is certainly, you're right to call out the danger that these things could have a lasting impact. When people in this country, North Americans, US citizens, stop thinking about our country as a country that welcomes refugees, that welcomes immigrants, as something to be proud of, when that's something that we maybe should be giving up, we are in a very, very dangerous moment.
Phyllis,
and that is what we are facing right now.
Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. Phyllis Spence is a writer, activist, political commentator speaking to us from Washington, D.C.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine, weekdays 6 till 9.
The South African Medical Association, SAMA, has officially suspended all relations with the Israeli Medical Association, a move welcomed by healthcare workers for Palestine, South Africa. The organization says this decision represents a powerful stand for medical ethics, justice, and human rights, echoing the global call for solidarity with Palestinians.
And recently, we've also seen other national associations, such as the British Medical Association, Turkish. They've released quite strongly worded statements, although none have gone as far as SAMA, to cut ties with the Israeli Medical Association, as well as to call for the suspension from the World Medical Association. It's a watershed moment that an organization has actually taken this step. And it's not an idle threat. SAMA is a member of the World Medical Association, and they can action this resolution by bringing it before the World Medical Association.
Dr. Sadiq Mullah, chairperson of Healthcare Workers for Palestine, South Africa.
Mornings made better with Peter and Asanda on Rise and Shine. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
The Tanzanian government says it's recording improvements in its responses to HIV/AIDS as new data shows that about 1.7 million people in that country are now living with the virus. Authorities say they have strengthened HIV/AIDS services nationwide, expanding the number of facilities offering treatment and ensuring free access to ARVs, even as global funding for HIV programs continues to decline. Isaac Lukando reports.
The Tanzanian government says that while progress is gradual, it is steadily pushing back against the spread of HIV/AIDS. Data indicates that the number of people living with HIV in Tanzania has remained relatively stable at around 1.7 million from 2019 to now. HIV prevalence among adults stands at around 4.4% on the mainland and 0.4% in Zanzibar, significantly lower than in several southern African countries. New annual infections have also fallen, dropping from roughly 72,000 in 2018 to about 60,000 today. Officials say their efforts are working, particularly with the expansion of free treatment centers. The number of facilities providing care for people living with HIV/AIDS increased by 398 within a year, roughly 5.1% in terms of a rise. They add that the near universal uptake of treatment services shows growing public willingness to test regularly and a stronger general awareness of HIV/AIDS. But sustaining momentum remains a challenge. UNAIDS notes that many African countries struggle with limited resources, with domestic revenue collections averaging around 16% of GDP, well before the global average, making self-financing the HIV response difficult. A similar concern is raised by the European Union's Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which projects a 30 to 40% decline in external health funding in 2025 compared to 2023. However, there are new developments offering some hope. A recent $150 million US commitment to Zipline will help the drone delivery service to support the distribution of medicines and vaccines to hard-to-reach areas across about 5 African countries. The move is seen as the first major shift in unfreezing foreign assistance by the US government and perhaps a crucial lifeline in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Isaac Lukando, Dar es Salaam.
And that brings the time to 15 minutes to 10. South Africa's long-standing 2013 memorandum, we'll get to that in just a moment, but let's focus on this. We mentioned it earlier on, a conversation around new analysis that's been provided by fibre network operator Fibertime. South Africa's population, it says, may well exceed 95 million, far more than the official figures that have been given. In a challenge of the last census, Fibre Time says its own data and remote sensing analysis reveals a much larger population than previously thought. Meanwhile, official numbers by Statistics South Africa places the population at 63.1 million, a figure based on their mid-year population estimates, which indicated a population that is largely Black African and with the majority living in the Gauteng province. So we engage now the former Statistician General for South Africa, Dr. Padi Lehohla. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Dr. Lehohla. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are, your assessment, given your experience. You're an expert in this area. Can one really use AI to census South Africa's population in the manner that they have?
You see, one should respect artificial intelligence, but it looks like we are coming to a situation where the metaphor might well be artificial intelligence and a stupidity original. So it looks like artificial intelligence is supposed to hide stupidity. When estimates as irrelevant as this ones of 95 million come, as a consequence of saying we used artificial intelligence, you really delve into serious stupidity. That original stupidity comes as an original attribute of people who actually think that artificial intelligence can substitute lack of knowledge and lack of deep understanding of statistics.
So traditionally then...
By the way...
yes, go ahead.
You see, for you to count as a sense in a census, you got to actually identify the structures on the ground, either using aerial photography or some other method that is rigorous, that tells you that these are dwellings and these dwellings are organized in this kind of way. That's how census is run. You've got to understand those. And it can't be that artificial intelligence suddenly increases the dwellings. I saw the document that says they are doing this fiber thing in some spaces across the country. There are areas that have been counted by Stats SA corresponding to those areas that they did the work. The question that has to be asked is how many structures did they establish on the ground? How many of those structures were actually occupied by people? And what was the average household size in those structures where there is correspondence at the area level, like Soweto, with the count of Statistics South Africa? If they then, out of that, estimate that there would have been 95, I mean, they have not gone to identify whether the structures have people, and if they have people, how many people per structure there are. Because that's a fundamental arithmetic that we have to apply before you even extrapolate to the rest of the country.
And that's what I was wondering, if they are being speculative about the use of services and how they then account for, as you mentioned, the remote sensing, geospatial mapping, because it is possible that what is down, and this is my very pedestrian thinking, that there may be more people in that house who don't necessarily live there.
Well, in 2001, 2002, as we are preparing for census of 2021, we actually looked at the structures and then looked at how many dwellings, how many structures were empty, and what was the cost of the empty structures. And there were quite substantial number of empty structures. So if you do not visit each dwelling, you may be doing a count on dwellings and not actually finding that there are people in there. So, I mean, the issue really is the South African population has been measured from 1860-something, when the first census of South Africa was undertaken. It would have excluded blacks, that's very true. From about 1910, a number of censuses have been undertaken, up to the one of 2022 by the Statistician General. Adjustments as necessary have been made to come to an estimate of that population. Besides the numbers of the people, there are births and deaths. And then out of that, you estimate what the projection of the population based on births and deaths, a demographic model. None of them come to close to a population of 95 million.
So,
regardless of whether it was under apartheid or under a democratic government, all these models are coherent and consistent. You cannot suddenly change the fertility or change the mortality patterns. These things have an organic motion in them that artificial intelligence cannot inspire. So to come with a 95 million, almost a third, bigger population than that we have, it is anchored in the entire economic system. And the economic system has to correspond with these numbers. There is no economic system that suggests that South Africa would have 95 million people.
So in 2022,
it uses the labor force surveys, where you have a certain number of people that are working. In a 95 million population, how many are actually in the age group 15 to 64? They have to answer those questions. And then what is the unemployment of South Africa? So the architecture, the architecture of statistics is an architecture embedded in science. And artificial intelligence is a product of statistical estimations, is an output of a regression model. So it's not this thing that just comes out of the air, and statisticians are quite aware of that.
So in 2022, what happened, Takelohotla? Because there were reports of, and in fact there were public criticisms of what was perceived as a 31% undercount. Was there such a discrepancy? And if that was the case, was it an issue of statistical governance perspective?
No. When you run a census, you are bound to miss people. You are bound to double count others. You are bound to have all kinds of combinations. And the statistical theory is applied to estimate the number that you have missed. So those you miss in the census, those you miss in the instrument that you use to calibrate the omissions, those that are only missed in the census but captured in the PS, and so on and so on. And that matrix gives you by area, by type of dwelling, type of settlement, by province, by everything, what it is that we have missed. That's why the Statistician General could confidently say we have missed 31%. And that 31% that we missed, we have adjusted for in the following way, by area, by province. So it is true, yes, there was an omission of 31%, but that was adjusted for through a scientific process, a scientific statistical process, not a process of cables that are being dug in the soil. And then you think that you are estimating the number of people. That's an insult to the profession. That's why I'm saying, my goodness me, artificial intelligence, stupidity original. That's when you use these things without any knowledge of science or any statistics, and you just fall into it as artificial intelligence. And when you do that, you reflect and you reveal stupidity original.
What are the dangers of this inaccurate demographic data? And could it have...
It's not only the danger of an inaccurate data, it is how the politics of our time actually decimate evidence and the science of evidence You see it with Trump. And with these kinds of things that come, it will not be unsurprising that the politics of South Africa start questioning this. Here is the problem. Once you underestimate or overestimate, or you play with data in the way that these guys are playing with it, the allocation of resources gets skewed. There is no rationality in the allocation and use of resources. And that's a very dangerous. We are already in a very slippery slope in South Africa, where the politics of our time don't even use data anyway. Now, when you bring these voodoo numbers, you then go into a very, very dangerous terrain. We have a very solid statistical institution, well respected around the world, one which has not been challenged, fortunately, by the politicians. But these voodoo scientists that pronounce artificial intelligence as the in thing, without any respect for methodological processes on which artificial intelligence is grounded, which is statistical, basically. For them to parachute in the way they have, it's an insult to the profession. And it's a very dangerous thing. And that's where you see artificial intelligence as being a very dangerous thing when it is not regulated.
What could be the possible motive to your mind?
Usually people who delve and work with money do a lot of things that are wrong. One of those, I must say, is the internal engine combustion, the ICE, internal combustion engines. Even before how this work was matured, people with money saw money out of it and popularized it. That is why today you spend only, in a 1 rand that you spend, you only get a benefit of 20 cents. And the rest of the heat that is produced is the one that is boiling the world. So when you bring money and politics and stupidity, all those trump signs, and when they trump signs, they lead to a very, very bad system of living, very, very bad social system. And these people who are talking about artificial science and coming with a third more population than we have in South Africa, that's voodoo. I wouldn't call voodoo statistics. There's no voodoo statistics. Statistics are statistics. But artificial intelligence gone wrong is what has happened. And usually you find when you peel off those things, you find financial interests in that kind of situation.
Not mincing his words, former Statistician General of South Africa, Dr. Padi Lehohla, speaking to us about this study analysis that's been put out by a fiber network operator, Fibertime, saying that South Africa's population could be more than 95 million. And you've heard Dr. Lehohla saying it's absolute rubbish. And he just says, really, it's stupidity that is informing this. So, interesting conversation then. That brings us to just about a minute and a half ahead of African Diaries. I hope you're not relying on artificial intelligence for whatever.
Ma'am, I was listening to that conversation, very intriguing, but no, not today. Not today.
But we do use it as part of, but that's why they always say you have to learn how to use it. And AI will tell you itself that, and they give you a warning, be careful because it is prone to making mistakes.
Yeah.
It's learning from you, actually. You're teaching
that's the sad part. I think because it's this all-encompassing one search engine optimization space, people think it's all-knowing, and it isn't.
And then you mixed your context, your texts, and...
Listen, let's talk about African Diaries. In the first hour of the show, we're going to look at how long need one wait before stepping into a new relationship. It is a relationship and relationship dynamics Wednesday, and the first conversation is, how long does it take to heal from the previous relationship? Is there a time frame? Because there's a nonchalance around breakups these days. It's almost like, yeah, that's past. I'm on to the next one. Is that real? Is it not? What's your take?
I don't think... I mean, if it was something, if you're attached to someone, if it has found tentacles in various aspects of your life,
yeah,
you can brush it away, but behind closed doors, or if you look at people's behavioral patterns, that will tell you whether or not they're really over it. And I remember reading something years ago suggesting that the amount of time that you spent with someone, it takes you half of that to get over that person.
Oh, what's a piece? Next conversation.
Just FYI.
Just for my information. Next conversation. Listen, quite a bit has been happening on social media, and we are seeing that the context of the LGBTQI plus community is evolving. Right. However, there are new terms that we don't understand. Okay. Non-demi-curious, semi-binary relationship. When I say that, what am I saying? I'll go again, don't worry. Non-demi-curious, semi-binary relationship.
You are none, that's 0. Demi, you are half. Semi, you are
maybe
proportion. Curious means you are not committed.
Yes.
You are a sojourner. So pila you are curious.
You know what? We explore that. And I think it's because in reality...
You're testing, actually.
You're
cooking.
You
are seeing if this is working.
Not cooking, Thabisa. Not cooking.
I'm just saying. Yeah, I can the experiment or you're like,
okay,
if I put in a teaspoon of sugar, does it give me the, I don't know. And by the way, this is just me trying to figure it out in my one brain cell.
Does that need a name though? If you think about it, people have been doing that for years. They've been testing waters. You know, they've been dabbling here and there. Same-sex interest, you know, opposite gender interest. Do we really need to term it? Is it important?
Because if you're coming up with something new and profound,
yes. Oh, gosh. And on that very interesting note, we end off there.
That's African Diaries coming up, and this is the end of Africa World Hour. Until the next time, goodbye.
Conversations that touch the heart and inspire change. Here on African Diaries, only on Channel Africa. Join us on www.channelafrica.co.za.